Hello, 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 and welcome to the 13th, I think, episode of Mixed Media Reviews Season 4. My name is Kelsey, and today I'm going to be talking about a book. This week's book is a trilogy called Villains and Virtues by A.K. Caggiano. I think it's how you say her name. The three books are Thrown in the Dark, Summoned to the Wilds, and Eclipse of the Crown. I'm really sorry, guys. May was just super busy, and it felt like every weekend there was something to do, and I've just been so exhausted from, life and work and everything else that I have not had even the time or ability to do anything. But today is a day, and I am tackling hopefully a couple episodes, so let's get back on track. Right in time for me to leave and have a break, but that's fine. I don't remember how I heard about these books. I may have just been going through like Kindle Unlimited and stumbled across them, or maybe it was one of those ads popping up on Facebook or Instagram. Who knows? I do know that I was adding yet another book to my Kindle Unlimited TBR, and I got a message saying that I needed to get rid of some because I was already at the max. And I realized I should probably read some books, because why am I paying for Kindle Unlimited if I'm just collecting books to be on my TBR? So I figured this would be a good one to start so I could get 3 books off my list by either reading them all or getting rid of them if I wasn't super into the first book. Well, lucky for me, I devoured them all super quickly, just in time to once again fill up my little TBR list. Caggiano's website states the summary for the first book, Thrown in the Dark, is the following. His dark destiny awaits, and nothing will stand in his way except her. Dark Lord Demonspawn prophesized Realm Destroyer. With a demon for a father, Damien Maleficus Bloodthorn's destiny could be nothing but nefarious, and with the completion of his most vicious spell, Damien is on the cusp of fulfilling the evil inevitability of all his dark machinations have led to. And then, her. Bubbly, obnoxious, blonde. Harboring secrets of her own, a tiny yet troublesome thief calling herself Alma completely upsets Damien's malevolent plans when she mistakenly gets chained to his side through magic, forcing him to drag her across the realm. Killing her would fix things, of course, but the nauseatingly sweet Alma proves herself on Damien's unholy crusade, and then proves herself the source of something even more sinister. Feelings. Will Damien be forced to abandon his villainous birthright to help the tender thorn in his side, or will he manage to overcome the virtue Alma insists on inspiring and instead cut it out at the heart? This is a super fun, super cute romantasy trilogy. Let's just get that out of the way, okay? Because apparently I can't stop reading romantasy as Tara has somehow awoken something inside me. That jerk of a best friend. I seriously, that's all I've been reading lately. And it's driving me insane, but also, it's fine. With one caveat that I will dive into later, I loved Caggiano's writing. It was simple without being too simple. It was quick and fun. It was tongue-in-cheek at times. The narration really picked up both of their voices, as it's written in dual point of views, and it really made that much harder to put down while reading. I love the silliness of the book while still having moments of sadness or intensity or anger. Caggiano did an amazing job at being able to be multiple things at once. Unlike the Crave series, I really love the chapter titles. If you've read Crave, you might understand, because they were kind of the worst. But these ones, they somehow read as satire while still being completely serious, if that makes sense, and it's just the best thing in the entire world. Caggiano is well aware of the tropes and the ridiculousness that can happen in these genres, both romance and fantasy, and she just has fun with it. I don't know how else to explain it, but it was an absolute joy to read because of that. But even more so, it was a good story with a good and solid plot. It felt like a real fantasy where side quests kind of kept popping up and keeping them from the one thing that they were trying to do, but not in a way that made it feel endless or ridiculous. One thing easily flowed into the next, and it made sense, these little side quests. and made it feel that much more like a real fantasy. I mean, this trilogy really hit on everything I love, and now I'm going to list some tropes, which may be spoilery for this episode, but, you know, insofar as tropes are always spoilery. But the things that I really love are the enemies to lovers, the slow burn romance, the grumpy sunshine. It was just really fantastic, and the way she did it was just so good. And I loved her way of doing the enemies to lovers, because it didn't feel toxic and it was cute, and yeah, I loved it. I may have read this from my Kindle, but I'm genuinely thinking about buying the physical copies just to keep them on myself so I can pointedly pick them up and read bits and pieces of them to remind myself of this trilogy's existence. Well, maybe not. I did just redo my bookshelves last weekend, and I bought more so I'd have more room, but I've also tried to tell myself this doesn't mean you can go buy a bunch of books, because you will soon find yourself out of room and you literally covered an entire wall with bookshelves and you'd have no other place to go. So I need to be strategic about what I buy, but I still might buy them. I haven't made up my mind yet. Books 2 and 3, Summoned to the Wilds and Eclipse of the Crown, respectively, were just as good as the original book, as the first one, maybe even better as we get more and more of the story to unfold. Because, and I cannot stress this enough, this was a solid fantasy. We even get a map in the third book, which, if you have been listening, you know I love a map. I just absolutely loved learning more and more about Amma and Damien, and I loved Kaz and all the other characters that come throughout these books as well. I'm just going to read you one of the highlights I have from the first book to help sell just how fun this book was to read. Damien gestured back to Amma sitting on the single narrow cot, which had been a complete waste of an only one-bed situation, and managed to somehow heighten the frustration he was feeling. I mean, it's just so self-aware, but at the same time, there was a legitimate, plot happening that I was very much invested in. And it's just, there's lots of things like that happen tongue-in-cheek. And in the last, book, the last, couple of chapter titles were even funnier and even more, on the nose. And even though this has actually been a while now since I read these books, because I typed this up and then apparently just never recorded it, I'm getting excited just thinking about them again, because I genuinely love them so freaking much. Okay, now let's talk, because I do have one critique, and it's kind of a half-hearted critique. I think because I really enjoyed Caggiano's writing, and because it felt kind of partially satirical in a way, that this isn't something that infuriated me or even made me feel like Caggiano's writing wasn't good. Which, when I say this, you're immediately going to say I'm a hypocrite, because it's very much an ode to ACOTAR for basically the same thing, only it's kind of not. Caggiano also has a comma problem. I have one highlight from the last book that had 10 commas in one sentence, and yes, that does seem like a lot, but it's also kind of understandable. I know, I'm such a hypocrite. And for the record, I do think we could have done fine with less commas, and that's why this is still in the critique section and not just, another thing I'm gushing about. But I do feel like it needs to be said that, in a way, this also kind of shows that Caggiano is a great writer, which I know the opposite of what I said about ACOTAR, but with ACOTAR, Moss writes in a way that gives the impression it wants to be a true fantasy, with a perhaps more purple prose, a higher brow of writing, if you will. So all the extra punctuation tends to annoy me, because it's not really congruent with the writing style. It didn't help the story flow better. It didn't make it feel like it was in this more fantasy-like prose. It didn't make it feel like she was narrating in a way that felt elevated, which of course, as we know, I'm sorry to laugh, as we know, the main character is illiterate at first, and so maybe, but doesn't mean that she doesn't know how to speak. I don't know. Anyway, it just was not really congruent with the writing style. But in these books, it does feel more like a stylistic choice rather than not. Like I said earlier, these books are a bit more simple. They're to be read in a more simple tone. They're not trying to be super fancy or written in some old-fashioned way, much like how I feel like Fourth Wing was done, where it felt more casual. It didn't feel like it was trying to be this fantastical, almost British style of writing that I feel like a lot of fantasy tends to try to do. They are more modern, and so the use of all these extra commas feels more like a person rambling more than anything else, which certainly fits the voices of the characters. That being said, I still think they could calm down. I won't read the 10 commas example because there are definitely some heavy spoilers in that one, and I think, though without context, it will still be very spoiler heavy, but I will read an example that's early in the first book. Near the tower's top, comma, a ring of spikes jutted out perpendicularly from a walkway that encircled it, comma, a bevy of crows resting there, comma, calling out to one another above the constant buzz in the swamp, comma, and at the very peak, comma, a pole extended skyward, comma, longer than the last time, comma, the place where an addition had been welded clear even from its distance, as if Anomalous had reattached it a few times after failed attempts. Period. That was one sentence. 7 commas. Let me read it again without the commas being said, but just paused at. Near the tower's top, a ring of spikes jutted out perpendicularly from a walkway that encircled it, a bevy of crows resting there, calling out to one another above the constant buzz in the swamp, and at the very peak, a pole extended skyward, longer than last time, the place where an addition had been welded clear even from this distance, as if Anomalous had reattached it a few times after failed attempts. Whew, that's hard to get through, guys. So yeah, 7 commas, and you may have noticed, isn't really a rambling voice type of sentence. It's, so while I feel it can fit in better with a more modern voice, still don't think it always works. And I think that sentence of just trying to describe, this building that they're coming upon, it's really hard to kind of follow. And there were a few times where I had to really go back and reread and try to figure out, okay, wait, what is she actually trying to say here? But it didn't pull me out of the story as much as it did with ACOTAR, mainly because I feel like it wasn't trying to be that much more, and it was already trying to have that kind of satirical vibe to it. So it is still kind of a critique, because I think sometimes it definitely would pull me out, and I think it didn't quite work, but there were other times when I think it worked really well, and she was able to really mesh it with the writing style, with the voice of the character, and with that kind of like satirical tone. If you haven't realized, I highly recommend these books. If you like romantasy but don't like super spicy books, then I think this is great, because these certainly are not. There are definitely some moments, but like I said, it's a super, super slow burn. Like, super slow. But there is a good dose of romance and fantasy in all 3 of the books. So if you still want some fantasy and some romance, then I think these are pretty good. They're also not ridiculously long. I think they're all under 350 pages, so they're like the perfect length. They're not part of this 800-page weird thing that we're getting from our romantasies. They're still pretty short. They're pretty easy to read, and like I said, I absolutely love them. Just reading some of my highlights while I had written this makes me want to read them again. And again, that was me a few weeks ago writing this up, and Kelsey right now wants to reread them because I'm just thinking about how good the books were, and I really, really loved them, in case you didn't notice. And there you have it. Those are my thoughts on the Virtues and Villains trilogy by A.K. Caggiano. Thank you so much for joining me. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr at Mixed Media Reviews Podcast. Please leave me a comment to let me know if you agreed or disagreed, if you've read them, if you haven't read them, if they're on a list, or if you have suggestions for the future. You can also find me anywhere you find your podcasts, probably, though using Spotify would be very helpful. Please join me next week, where I'm going to be reviewing some TV shows, I think. It's probably just going to be a catch-up of some shows that I'm currently watching or have currently wrapped up. That is definitely what's going to happen, because I just wrote that. So, surprise! Okay, have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye!